Hello, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you may be. Welcome to our session today. As mentioned before, this is the third in the actual, this is the last in the series of three that we've actually started to do. So Mark and I are actually going to walk you through the actual, this session today. Mark, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Mark. I'm like a solution architect from X-Rite.
So I'm Martin Cusack. I'm the actual Esko color product manager. So as said, this is the third one. So we're going to take you through, we've already gone through the basics. We've already gone through then the actual using this color information in production. Now it's a matter of a case of actually, okay, now we've measured it. How can we get that verification back? But depending on that information, it could actually vary depending on your role. So we're going to what we've tried to do this time is to try to break it down depending on different roles, different personas, different areas, because each one of these sort of areas will actually have different challenges, as we're trying to show you here. So I know there's a lot more challenges, but just to try to kind of break it down, if you like, into a few. So from a brand perspective, there may actually be a case of that they actually want, again, their color to be on-shelf. The on-shelf consistency is absolutely key. But again, as we've talked about through these sessions, is that the turnaround time and the change is actually becoming tighter and tighter and tighter. So they actually want, if there's a particular promotion, if there's a particular event going on, a World Cup, an Olympics or something, they actually want to get this there quite quickly. They actually want to make it a bit more personal for you. But at the same time, they actually want to get that data back to actually say that everything is done within their specification. So as said, that the actual, the color on shelf is super consistent. From a trade shop perspective though, again, maybe slightly different. Of course, they actually want to actually get to the consistency, but it's maintaining that consistency. It's a case of that they actually want then the actual systems to be easy to use. They actually want to actually be able to keep their costs down to a manageable thing, so they're actually not having so much waste. Some of the skill level in this area has dropped, so the systems and the applications and the hardware has got to be easy to actually use. Again, from a converter's perspective, like everybody, that margins are extremely tight. They don't want to, because there's more and more shorter runs, they actually want to be able to actually sort of say, how can we best manage this so we're not throwing away X amount of waste? And again, back to the brands, it's a case of they're turning around saying, we've got targets on our waste now from a sustainability perspective. So there's all these sort of challenges that we actually have. So that's what we've tried to do today, but kind of focus, if you like, on different challenges. So from a brand perspective, as said, is that you've actually got, they've actually got certain targets. From a recyclable perspective, they actually want to actually be able to say that they're committed to, and there's certain regulations in place now across the globe as to by a certain year that they need to actually hit a certain percentage, so they are actually, there's not X amount of plastic in the oceans, etc., etc. So in doing so, that they actually put quite an aggressive sustainable goal in place, so that we have to adhere to that, and therefore that filters it down to, as I said, the trade shops and everybody else. So they're shifting some of their balance now between the digital side of things, and they're trying to actually sort of manage that. They're trying to reduce the actual manual work. So when we talk to brands as Esko, X-Rite and Pantone, the brands are also very considerate of their supply chains. They are sort of aware of that. Whatever solution that they implement, they're actually trying to see where does it benefit and how does it benefit, and how can we actually have a positive impact to the actual environment so we minimize that waste. All of these, again, are challenges. But in doing so, of course, actually start to actually say that color is super important, as I said, for the brand. So just some numbers for you as a case of that, they will actually say 87% will actually then say it actually sort of is brand recognition, and purchasing decision is absolutely critical for these people. And I've just listed a few actually on logos on the screen here, but you can think of more yourself. Now, if you think about it, which we'll come on to shortly as well, if you then turn around and actually say that, well, in today's market and when we had COVID, you actually found that, well, actually, previously I gave it to this particular site and I gave them the work, and maybe at that site I gave it to Bob. Bob did the printing for me. He's very good. Well, now, again, well, maybe that site is closed down. What about if I have to move it? Maybe it's a case of that actual guy is actually retired. Now I've got to do it because, again, we've found all these sort of skill shortages of actually sort of shaking the tree a little bit. So, and like I said, is that if you then move the actual job, you have this challenge of being able to sort of say, well, how do I actually therefore make it that the actual I'm getting the color consistency? So as we go through these slides, we're trying to emphasize about the fact of how these different solutions can help you along the way to actually make these things a lot easier for you and make it simpler for you. But as stated in one of the other sessions, that as Mark was actually sort of saying, is that if the actual color is what's deemed, let's say, is slightly off, as you go to actually sort of pick up this actual this product from the shelf, and I believe it's around about like 5 seconds as we actually making our mind up to actually pick up and purchase this as a consumer. If we don't think that that's correct, then is it counterfeit? Is it out of date? Therefore, do we actually then look for another product? Do we actually then start to actually sort of doubt and move somewhere else? And these are absolutely key then for the brand, and they actually sort of pay for a certain position on that shelf. So we can actually, and there's a lot of research gone into this, that it's in the best place for them to actually do it. So if you're ever walking around a supermarket and wondering, it's quite annoying that they keep on moving these things, well, there's a reason why they actually do that. So similarly, that they, through again the COVID side of things, that what they actually found is a case of that they didn't have to actually go through some of these press approvals. And previously what they were doing was a case of flying people around. And of course, when they actually sort of get there, they may actually at best only have the opportunity to actually sort of sign off one particular job. Maybe it's that same color on throughout the day, but over different jobs. But now they don't have to do that. So in doing so, they're also meeting some of these actual these sustainability goals that they're actually setting out to do. So that's, if you like, pushed us as developers and software and actual hardware sort of companies to be able to actually then start to say, what can our products now do for you to help you achieve your particular targets? And that's what this is actually showing you here. Is a case of that we can cut down on the amount of fuel, we can cut down on the amount of traffic that's on the road, etc., etc. So you don't have to actually go and do that. You can get the data, you can get that measured data, which is like I said, is the digital data. You can scan that data, measure that data. In fact, if you're actually using an inline device, which we'll show you later, you therefore don't even have to cut the material because there's less waste there as well. So we can actually then, once we've measured all that data, we can feed that back to you. So you can actually sort of have it from the comfort either of your home, of your office, in the application of your choice. That data comes back to you. So as we explained in the earlier session, is that a case of that we've gone and digitized a lot of these libraries. So, and it's not just a matter of digitizing it, we've mapped it again accordingly, just to actually make sure that there is, you're getting that on-shelf consistency, and you're actually getting the fact that it's the same color between these different substrates, within reason, of course, of the actual substrate and the process. So Pantone Live has actually gone and done that for you. They've taken the actual sort of, let's say, heavy lifting of that. They've done the mapping, they've done all the measurement data and the actual algorithms to actually sort of make sure everything is is within tolerance. And this is what they're building year on year to actually, as the industry changes, to actually then say, well, we've got a new substrate coming in. Back to my sustainability perspective, this is a better substrate for us as a brand to be using. Can you get this particular substrate available in your library? So this then is actually shared globally for everybody else to use. And all of this is working to those tight tolerances that we've spelt out previously. Now, from a trade shop's perspective, it has said that they start to actually have slightly different challenges, but they're actually going to be using this type of hardware on a day-to-day basis. So they actually want an actual the CDI to actually go and image the actual plates, and next to it, they actually also want the exposure side of things to be able to consistently expose this unit, so it actually sort of baking the actual the dots and the screens together. But it's not just a matter of actually sort of making it simple. It's got to be accurate. And for me, this is probably the game changer for a lot of things in the respect of now that you've actually got LED technology, and what you see actually on your screen is a case of, as this will travel across, it will actually sort of bake the actual from the top and the bottom, the plates, therefore making the actual dots and the screen absolutely consistent. But from an operator's perspective, back to, as I said before, about the challenges that they've actually got from a skill level, it's super simple to actually use. That you have your touch screens available, and in the touch screen here is a case of that these are predefined database which have got certified plates. So again, everything that we've referred to previously is matching to certification, whether that be actually on the press, whether that be somewhere else. But here now in the trade shop environment, we're giving them super consistency, so that they know that when this is imaged and etched, then they know it will actually be consistent. So as the plate comes out, it will actually be exposed and actually then handed over in an automated way on this particular image to the actual exposure unit, and then that will pick it up and start to do its thing. So therefore making it super simple as well. But with this, we've also got some certification, again, around different factors. So it's down to the dematerialization section. We have, again, something here, but also from an energy perspective. So what we've actually found is from a converter's perspective, we can save around about 59% from an energy. And then again, from a trade shop perspective, because they may be using it a bit more frequently, they're actually then starting to have a 41%. All of these are actual factors that people actually want to do now. And this, again, contributes back to what the actual brands are actually asking for. So they're turning around and actually saying that, again, we've got to remember what I said before. We've got to hit this particular figure by this particular time. So these factors actually then go for to actually build towards that and actually then make it easier for everybody else. But again, when we come to actually start to say that we actually want to do some measurements to this, we've said before in the other session the other day, we started to actually measure towards a specification, whether that be a G7, a FOG, or an ISO specification. We're actually outlining to say that when we do the measurements of this, we want to make sure that we're hitting that particular target. So the software that comes with the actual the CDIs actually enables you to actually sort of hit that target. So it gives the trade shop the reassurance that when I make my plates and I hand it over to either maybe the printer next door or the printer somewhere else, miles and kilometers away, that they know that this is actually going to be able to be achievable because of the specification that's actually aimed towards. So here they can actually measure against the CMYK. They can, whether it be extended gamut as well, they can also measure those things as well. And this gives them the reassurance that it actually is actually hitting the target, and you get your report back illustrating those things. But because we talk here now about more of a connected solution as well, you've now left that maybe that plate room environment, but you've done all your measurements and you actually want to sort of share that data with your colleague who may be on a totally different shift, maybe in a totally different continent. they can actually, this information is shared accordingly, and they can actually then just apply it. What I was showing you a moment ago is, you see here that we're actually said that we've given this a particular name. Well, this is then saved to the database. So then the pre-press person, when he comes to actually make his plates, he actually picks up the same name. It picks up exactly the same condition. Therefore, any of the measurement data that was actually applied previously or measured previously is automatically applied in their workflow. So if we've actually got a certain curve, a certain screen, a certain specification, even down to, as shown here, we're trying to remove certain, what we call, let's say, scum dots. We want to get rid of those because we don't want them to print and actually change the quality of our print. We can do so as well. So this makes it a lot more simplified and connected to actually sort of close that loop for everybody. And this is just confirming that we can actually just, in the software, we're confirming to actually sort of to the operator that we've actually achieved that specification, and even what is the screen and the curve that we're actually specifying against, whether this be a 175 LPI, a 200 LPI, a 150, it's all included with the actual software that you can actually go and do it. Again, it just gives that peace of mind, that confirmation that you're actually achieving that. And previously, this was very, very time consuming to be able to do this. And maybe not the actual, keep on saying it, but the actual skill level has actually dropped. So that those users aren't available anymore to actually be able to start to quantify some of these things. So we've got to try and make it that the software helps them towards some of these targets. Now, from a converter, as the converters start to pick up some of this information, it's got some other, now we're going into slightly different challenges. And the first one, as I said before, is a case of actually now, hang on a second, I previously have printed it in Chicago, and I now need to move this job because either COVID's hit or actually Chicago's super busy. So I now need to move this to maybe Boston. How do I actually sort of get that consistency? How do I actually maintain that so my brand has on-shelf consistency, so I don't have that discrepancy or concern when I go to buy it off the shelf? Well, one of those things that we've gone and done is, as said, with the likes of Pantone Live and our own Esko Cloud, is actually we've centralized all these color assets. So we've made it so a case of that your software can actually easily point towards this cloud and pick up this data. So it's no longer that you're going to actually have islands of databases where Chicago's got its own database and Boston's got its own database, and they could be slightly different. They can actually make sure that they're all going to the single source of truth. So this enables us to actually move the job, as we said, seamlessly from site to site. Should there just be a case of that there is capacity or opportunity in one site or another. But we also, as I said, it gives that reassurance, it gives that load balancing aspect, enable us to actually go and do that. So Mark, did you actually want to start to talk about these?
Yeah, absolutely. So we've got this concept of digital color maturity, where the different levels of color communication and QA and control all the way through it's kind of evolving, is what we've done. So if we kind of go back a few years ago, it was good enough to be able to print a sample, compare it to maybe a proof, eyeball it, say, yep, good enough, ship it. Perhaps you had the print buyer, the brand would come in there for the first run, observe that first run, and sign off on a first pull that says, yes, this is good enough, and then everybody would visually match that one, right? So that was not uncommon, not that long ago. And then we started to evolve a bit more and actually use more proper viewing booths and taking some measurements to compare that original retain from that first run to our current run. And that worked okay. And then occasionally the brand owner, the print buyer, would come in to look at your print production, and check that out. Again, visually, you're sending sheets back and forth. Hey, we did your run. Here's a sample of what we ran. Are we good? That kind of stuff, right? those days, that's got to go away, because those aren't sustainable. Those involved, as Martin said earlier, that involved people flying around checking these press runs. That involved shipping samples back and forth. That also involved, if it failed, if the print buyer had said, the sample you sent us isn't good enough, you end up sending that production run to the landfill and starting over. Though that's not sustainable. Okay, so moving on beyond the visual and visual subjective stuff that you see on the left side of the screen, we need to get into measured and objective. So we're actually going to look at digital standards. Instead of it's my opinion versus Martin's opinion, this is a good print, it's go by the numbers. We're going to measure it. It's going to have a tolerance wrapped around it. Okay, and we're going to be either in or outside that tolerance. It's a go, no go, pass, fail kind of scenario. Okay. We're going to communicate with digital standards, sharing them across the supply chain. The same numbers that we're going to use in the press room are the same numbers that prepress is using for their proofing and their specification of these colors. Okay. So by moving to that, that's much more sustainable. We're moving around digital data to specify these colors, to build this, to QC this stuff, and then to report back. That's all it's moving around is digital data, not physical. So that's ultimately where we're going to get to sharing data across. Okay, so that's the middle section there. That's where we're getting to. And on the far right side, we've got as X-Rite additional tools to look at other appearance things that's kind of way down in the future for most of us in the print world, but it's already being used in other types of color and manufacturing. But really, for those of us in this group today, we need to get to the situation where we're got the workflow connectivity across production, sharing the data across there. Next, please. There we go. So for starters, got to use your instruments, and to make things efficient and make sure that the operator can collect a lot of data faster, click next, please. You should be building your plates with the with color bars that are scannable. Okay, and with that, like in the example here, we're looking at the new Exact 2. It's got a built-in scanning feature. The operator can place the instrument at the end of the bar, click a button, and roll it across and capture all the data quickly directly into the instrument, or even better, directly into software in a quick pass, rather than clicking for each individual color. They can scan and collect it all and see a lot more data quicker, and then be able to take action for that. Next, please. So when we pulled into software, and we've mentioned this in previous presentations, but I thought it'd be appropriate here as well, is the software provides much more dashboard kind of presentation of the color, very graphic. As you can see here, we got LAB plots, we've got the best match plots, we've got the numbers, and we got the tolerance. And the operator can look at these things to determine what kind of changes are required to get this color back on. Okay. What's more is, this isn't just transient. It doesn't. I'm not taking the measurement and it just disappears. I'm going to record that data so that management can come back and look at it and determine perhaps root causes to, if I had to take a long time to get this thing on color, how long did it take me to get on color? How far off was it, and why in the beginning? Notes can be added to each of the measurements describing the corrective actions that were made to bring it on color. And all that data can then be reviewed later to improve our process, so that the press operator doesn't have to fight with color every time. Perhaps they can start out closer because maybe the ink was not quite right. Maybe it was too strong to start with, and we needed to cut it back a little further to start with so they don't have to struggle with it so much. Perhaps we got issues with often getting the wrong inks out to press. A variety of things. We got the TVI curves here. A TVI curve can indicate a number of mechanical things wrong with the press. It can also indicate that we've got excessive plate wear, that we're running the plates longer than they should be. All of this data can then be used to determine how do we build in corrective actions so that every time we come to press, we can reduce the amount of time to come up to color correctly. We also have the opportunity to share all this data to scorecard options, which we'll talk about more later, but this provides better visibility to a number of internal stakeholders, management, quality room, and so on, and can also be shared out to your customers. So when you're printing for a brand, and they, rather than shipping them examples, retained sheets of your press run, they can look at the data on a web-based system to see how you're doing. Now, I see a couple questions popped up here. I want to take a look at these real quick. So one of the questions is, do I have the ability to connect to proofers too? And, oh, I'm sorry, I do see that some answers were applied here. Let's see.
Yeah, I got those, Mark. I picked those up.
Good. I'm sorry, I didn't realize you saw them. All right, we're good.
No,
all right, next, please. So as I mentioned, building in a scannable bar to measure. The other thing is that for the offset press people, these already do have a bar at the end of the sheet for managing all the keys across the full width of an offset press. And having a press operator manually take a device and measure those patches is terribly inefficient. Using a scanning system like the IntelliTrax to scan the full bar, gathers all the data very quickly, provides tools like best match. They can adjust to get the closest LAB match, as we talked about previously. It's not about density anymore. It's really about hitting the color, okay? We've got built into our software that drives this, the G7 support. So all the tools to help you hit the G7 metrics of gray balance. There's also optional closed loop control of the press, where that data that comes into your IntelliTrax can in turn drive controlling of the keys directly, rather than requiring the operator to go and adjust those manually. And this shortens the make ready significantly. Additionally, the data that's collected can actually also be fed back into that color cert software I talked about a moment ago, which gives you all those other benefits of being able to record this data, report it to customers, view it at a management level to determine where we have got opportunities for process improvement and so on. All that can come from this solution as well, ultimately driving to that bottom line there, reducing the time and material waste to make this a more sustainable process.
But Mark, as well, if I could actually, even on screen, it's even easier for the operator as well, right? Because it's quite a clear indicator for them as to actually, am I in tolerance, am I out of tolerance? So even if they don't quite understand this LAB information, it's quite visual for them as well, right?
Absolutely, yeah. And in fact, so we're working with a lot of operators that are traditionally looking at density, right? So when you're looking at tools like Best Match, the goal is to try to get to an LAB match, but it gives the operator density or ink strength guidance to get there, right? Same goes for here, as you can see the screen that's pictured here. We show you each ink that's on the press, and we show you red if it's failing, yellow if it's on the border of failing, and green if it's passing. So you immediately get driven to wherever there's red on the screen, you go to that first and you make the adjustments up or down, and it gives you guidance up or down to get there. So even if you are manually making the adjustments on this, it's still much faster than taking a measurement, looking at the numbers, thinking about which way do I need to go with that, make the adjustment. Instead, you quickly see up, down, is it pass or fail, and you respond to it. Yes, absolutely. Next, please. So also, one of our sister companies, part of Esko now, is AVT. And this is an inline inspection system that includes the SpectroLab. The SpectroLab is a spectrophotometer that is very fast, and it'll measure color patches across the form. So that head that you see there with the AVT logo on the side there as the web is moving through the press, that will move across and take quick snaps of the color patches as they come by, and it'll proceed throughout the run to collect each one of the patches in a sequential color bar to build out all of the measurements that are required there throughout the run. It's constantly remeasuring those throughout the run and updating, providing the operator with nearly instantaneous feedback on their color during the run. As Martin mentioned earlier, this allows us to run this press without having to stop it and have an operator go up and cut a sample out of it and measure it by hand. They'll see feedback immediately while it's running, and they'll be able to make adjustments on the fly to keep that color in spec. They'll get up to color faster. Their make ready will come up faster, and they'll be able to maintain that throughout the run. This is going to save a lot of material and time. It's going to provide traceability. It's going to record this data. It's also can be integrated with color cert, and ultimately provides the brand with visibility of this as well. Next, please. So we talked about all these different instruments. I mentioned the handheld exacts. We got the AVT. We got the IntelliTrax. We've worked hard to try to maintain the ability to trust the data you're measuring across all these instruments. Okay. Now, there's instruments that preceded all those. As you see on the left side there, they're a little faded there because they're older instruments. Way back when we had the Exact 500 series and the Great Dynamic Best Spectral those instruments, we worked on a calibration system to bring those two different families of instruments to match more closely, okay? And then starting out with the Exact 1 was the very first instrument that was manufactured using this XRGA calibration method. And that's where all this XRGA started. And it's completely ISO compliant. We're using the very best methods for calibration. We use traceable tiles in our factory that we're measuring, and they're compliant and traceable through American National Institute of Standards and Technology. This single calibration method that we use across all of our instruments provides much better intermodal agreement between all these different kinds of instruments. So not just at the press room, but in pre-press, where you're measuring maybe press sheets in order to make data sets to use for your proofing, or data sets to be used for your color separation. So your ISIS, your I1s, your IO tables, all these devices that we produce all are calibrated using this XRGA method. So they're much more tighter agreement. Now, granted, each one's a little bit different, so you will have some difference between them, but they're much tighter in their agreement than instruments may have been in the past.
And Mark, is this is XRGA now an industry standard, an ISO standard? Does it comply to that, or is it?
It aligns with the ISO 13655, which is around measurement, and there's also another ISO. It escapes me right now. I can't recall what it was. There's another ISO standard that it complies with, so it aligns with those. Yep. So next, please. Now, so while all that XRGA was designed to try to bring all of our instruments to be more in agreement across all the different models, okay, the other things that can be done to improve even further within your family of instruments is there's a tool called Net Profiler. It is now a web-based tool where you will measure in a series of patches, then a special Net Profiler card that was measured at our factory. Your device measurements will be compared back to master measurements, and you'll have basically three states that'll come up. Okay, one is it looks at the measurements you've provided when you took your measurements, your card, and says, hey, your numbers are really close, no corrections required, you're tight, you can run. A second condition is you're slightly off from the master, and we're going to tighten that up a little bit and load a calibration into your instrument to modify it, to bring it tighter, okay? Third scenario is it's measured and it's so far out, it's determined that it can't make a correction, and it'll alert you that your instrument failed and you'll need to send it in for service. Now, what's really important about doing this on a regular basis, and it's a monthly thing that you do to take these measurements, is that while when you send it in for service on an annual basis, you may send it in for an annual basis where it gets put onto a robotic arm and it's measured against those tiles I mentioned earlier, and it's gets a whole bill of health checkup, okay, at the factory. Once it gets sent back out, over time, things can influence it that may change the color, how receptive it is, how well it reads color. That perhaps the instrument was abused or damaged. And if it doesn't flag the problem in its normal white calibration, you could continue measuring and getting inaccurate measurements. By doing the net profiler each month, it will let you know, you can be assured that you're measuring good color every time. And again, it tightens up the pool of instruments all to measure similar. You can see in the graph in the middle of the page here, the red line out here represents the color error, okay, of this device relative to the master. And after calibration, you can see that it's much tighter. Now, while the red line out there is still very good, the blue line shows that it can be tightened up significantly more. And if you're thinking about a pool of instruments, bringing them all tighter, that really is going to give you much more assurance that if I'm measuring something and you're measuring something with instruments that are net profiled, we can trust that those measurements would align. Additionally, X-Rite has a new dashboard tool to manage fleets of instruments. And this tool, you'll register your instruments to it. And when you do your net profiler calibration, that information is stored up there, along with your service status and history. You can manage firmware across the fleet. You can, as you can see in this graphic in the back here, you can see where your instruments exist geographically. There's as I look at the instruments here, I can see little icons that tell me if the firmware is up to date, has it been net profiled, what's its service status, a number of things. Very quickly at a glance, I can see the health and behavior of my instruments out in the field. This is a great way for multiple sites to know, if I've got plants across the globe, I can know that everybody's been maintaining their instruments properly. Or I can go out and, if I see that some instruments aren't maintained correctly, I can go and address that particular site to see what's going on there. Next,
and Mark,
please.
Just another bunch. So again, with net profile, if I'm right, is a case of it just gives because it brings the actual device back to a certain tolerance, that then will actually then be, if you like, certified rubber stamped on the device, and that information will travel through with the measurements, correct?
Oh, yes, absolutely. So that is a tag that gets written into the data. And in fact, there are some brand owners that have some requirements that you do have net profiler for the instrument, so that you're providing them more assurance that the measurements you're providing are accurate. And so we do put a tag in that measurement data that goes along with it, so that when you're reporting to brands, they can see that yes, that device is net profiled, and the standards the samples you've measured also are tagged that you've done it with a net profiled instrument.
So going back to the other statements I made, is a case of that on-shelf consistency, and you've printed at multiple sites. If you've net profiled your exact in this example, you're confident that you're going to get that consistency, right? That's
correct. Absolutely.
And just another note, there is a case of that. What about, some questions coming in about M0, M1, M2. Is there any sort of guidelines as to that? Should you actually measure with one over the other, or does it depend on the circumstances that you're in?
Well, that is a good question. So while just a little background, the different modes, just to kind of recap for those people who don't know. M0 really represents legacy instruments. It's a condition that we've been on many of our older instruments we hit. It's not it doesn't have a complete specification of the illuminant, for example. It doesn't say how much UV light should be in that illuminant, so it's kind of missing from that. So different instruments may have different amount of UV light in there, and a couple other things like that. Whereas M1 specifies exactly how much and what amount of what that UV light should look like that's in that light source. Okay, so that's the difference between the two. Now, if you're measuring materials that have no optical brighteners, the net results can be pretty much the same M0 and M1. So it's not there's no consequence of going one versus the other. They should measure very much the same, because without the UV or with the UV won't impact what the color looks like if there's no optical brighteners in the materials. Okay. If you're working with substrates that have a lot of optical brighteners in the substrates or even in the inks, then you should be using M1 so you can quantify what that looks like. Okay. That said, though, we do have a bit of a challenge in our industry, is that we've got a legacy of custom colors that the ink companies have stored in their databases that are all based on M0. They don't have the M1 data. So there is the challenge of moving to M1 that does slow some things down a bit there. With the print standards for process, CMYK, orange, green, violet, they typically, especially for the offset, will be based on M1 measurements. Most of a lot of systems nowadays are like ColorCert, for example, will allow you to measure mixed mode. So you can measure some stuff in M1, some stuff in M0. So if you're working in just, let's say, an exact with ColorCert, that is supported. So you could do your 4-color process with M1 in that scenario, and then your spot colors in M0. Okay, that can be supported. Other systems out there don't support switching back and forth between modes. And there, again, if it doesn't have optical brighteners, don't worry about it. You can use either M1 or M0 in that case, and they'll measure the same. If all your data is stored as M0, then you might as well just continue measuring as M0 as long as there's no brighteners.
Thanks.
Next, please. Okay, so I mentioned this earlier about the scorecard server. So I've got a number of customers that are large converters that have sites all around the country, in fact, in multiple countries, and they need to track how they're producing stuff. Very much like Martin mentioned earlier, if I have to load balance and move work back and forth between plants, I need to know that they're all printing to a certain quality level, that they're all producing good color matching. And so the idea of having a one place to look at all the data holistically is very useful. So the scorecard server provides a running list of all jobs that we've run and measured, showing the scores, and I can use that to dig into the different plants' production, look at how well they're hitting the numbers, where they're having problems with it. I got this one plant that just can't quite get the dot gain, the TVI is always out of control. Maybe I need to focus on finding the root cause for that at that plant. I've got another plant that doesn't seem to hit certain spot colors quite right. What's going on there? I need to get into the root cause of that at that plant. And by resolving those issues and bringing everybody's quality up, then I know that I can move that work back from plant to plant and expect that the same quality will come out. So when they all hit the store shelves, we're going to have matching results here. Similarly, the brands want to see that from their suppliers. As shown earlier, we had the red color across a number of different Coke packaging, for example. They want to know that same color is being reproduced at different plants by different suppliers. So that when it all hits the store shelf, they get that predictable, desirable color matching. So they'll use a scorecard server in a similar way, but theirs is looking at their suppliers, whereas again, most of my customers, I work more with the producers. They need to know that they've got good quality cross, and they're using again continuing improvement all there. So they can look at the trending. How well are different plants performing? Do we have outliers with different issues? Do we have opportunities to improve this stuff? This is where they'll see this data. So what you're seeing in the screen, and I'm sorry it's kind of fuzzied out on purpose to protect the innocent here, but they can go up there and they can look at by job name. They can drill in, so they know certain jobs come up regularly. They can go and look at how that job's been running over time. They can look by press. They can look by plant location. They can search the data a lot of different ways and slice and dice it to find where are issues. How do you narrow those down? And then they'll see, of course, the scores. And they're going to, in the case here, I've got this focusing on some low scores because that's where I've got my best opportunity for improvement. It's this scoring, the color bars here are as a red light, yellow light, green light kind of approach. If everything's green, we're all good. Everything's perfect. We don't need to worry about it. If I start seeing stuff in reds and yellows show up, those are areas that I need to pay attention to, that I need to look to see where are the problems, what can we do to improve these things. And I could, if I were in the actual scorecard, I would click on the job. It would open it up and show me more details about it. Next, please.
But Mark, sorry, you actually then, you of course actually do, and again, the brands would actually have different, you saw there with the can or the actual, the film or the actual box itself. So there's different devices that we would actually sort of say this device is maybe best suited for this particular substrate over this one because it's going to reflect differently. It's going to actually do this differently. You support different type of devices as well, right?
Oh, yes. Yeah. So for a lot of what we're printing, good solid color, the instrument, the X-Act is a perfect instrument. It's known as a 45-0 or 045 instrument. The way it reflects light off of the surface works really well off of a lot of stuff that we print. However, if we're printing on highly reflective materials or textured materials, then we need to have a different kind of instrument that is known as a sphere-based instrument that can measure those kinds of things. And all that can be collected in color cert and reported and viewed much like we just talked about. So we do have those kinds of instruments. Yeah, I think that's the.
Yeah,
does that answer?
I think that covers everything in the respect that basically, depending on the substrate, depending on the actual data you actually want to get back, is you can actually then start to sort of say that you actually use different type of instruments to do certain things, right?
Absolutely. Yep. So if I were to click on, thank you. If I were to click on one of those jobs in my scorecard server, I can do a little bit more of a deep dive to see how that press ran, okay? And in fact, if on the left side here, partway down, there is even an indicator of the net profiler status, okay? I can see the instrument that was used. There you go. Thank you very much. I can see what instrument was used. Has it been calibrated? So in this case, it says active there. That means that it is using Net Profiler and it has been calibrated. I can see that they use an X-Rite X-Act XP. Maybe that's particularly appropriate for the type materials that I'm measuring. In fact, actually, to your point earlier, Martin, there is actually, even with the X-Acts, there's the non-XP model is perfect for papers and a lot of different materials. But if you are printing on film materials, there's in the process of making films, the extrusion sometimes will put in kind of like little lines that are hard to see in there. But that extrusion process, when we take measurements off of it, there is kind of an interference that goes on with the polarizing filtrates in the instruments. And so it can mess up your measurements. And this is not unique to our instrument. Other companies have had similar problems. And what happens is if you take a measurement in one orientation and then you move the instrument, say 90 degrees or 120 degrees from that first measurement, you may get slightly different measurements. So with the XP instrument, we've removed that polarizing filter, and then we take measurements at different orientations. You'll get more consistent measurements. So that also might be something that many of you may find important if you're printing on film materials. The exact XP and the exact 2 XP would be more appropriate for those measuring conditions. But in any case, I can see a lot of stuff, metadata on this job. You know, what's the job name? What's the number? When was it run? That kind of stuff. And then I can see an overall scoring. The middle there, you'll see I've got grading or scoring for the total job score, and then a breakdown of what did the primaries measure? What did the undertones measure? That's a color of tints. Spot colors. Okay, and this one I have some troubles with my spot colors. It's highlighted in red there. Overprints, how well did those reproduce? And so on. And so I can see each of the different metrics that I ran, how well do they run? Where do I have more problems with? Well, with this particular run, I clearly have some problems with my spot color production. So maybe I want to do a little deep dive into that and figure out why. On the right side, you'll see graphics that illustrate how individual colors ran throughout the run. So in the upper right corner there, you'll see the average LAB values throughout the run. And then you see a graph to the right there that shows the delta E that was achieved for each of the CMYK values, or each of the CMYK inks, the delta E's that we measured throughout the run. So you can see that we stayed within the 2 delta E, or I'm sorry, under 2.5 delta E on all the colors, mostly through the run. Towards the end, the cyan drifted out a bit. There too may be an opportunity to go back and find out, well, why did that go out? What was going on with that? So instead of just having one number tell you what's going on there, and that one number is useful for saying, hey, was this a good run? But if I want to make it better, I need to be able to dig into the data and find out what was out and when did it go out, so that I can later figure out why did it go out, so that next time I run, I can eliminate that issue so that I can stay tighter and improve my run each time.
But the color search score itself as well, Mark, is calculated around those things as well, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you look at the scoring panel in the middle, each of the metrics of primaries, undertones, spot colors, and so on, they get a score based on how well I produce. Now, the scoring mechanism works like this. If it's not like grading like it's like when you're in school, like, hey, you need to get 90% or better to get an A kind of thing, right? It doesn't work that way. The way it works is we've got a range of 0 to 100 points, okay? You have a tolerance of, let's say, 2 delta E on a color, right? If I hit 2 delta E, or I hit 0 delta E, perfect match, I'd get 100 points, okay? So that's an aspirational goal. We're never going to get 100 points, right? If I hit 2 delta E, I'm just barely in the tolerance. I promised to print at 2 delta E or better, and I just hit 2 delta E. I'm just at the edge of an acceptable print there. That would be 50 points, okay? So from 100 points to 50 is the acceptable within tolerance of 2 delta E. Now, once I go past the 2 delta E, now I'm going to get 49, 48, and so on, okay? As I go lower, I'm going to get, of course, lower points, but I also have a compliance issue. I'm failing. I'm outside of my promised tolerance. So I'm actually going to get penalized for that, okay? So let me come back to that. The score is taking all the different metrics that we measured, and we get a score for every metric we get, and it calculates all those out, and then I get a production level here, right here. This is my score of 71. So if I took and figured out the total score of all these metrics, I get a 71 points, okay? Averaging out all those is 71. However, because as I mentioned, I had some here that are out of tolerance up there, my rate of compliance is only 83%. So 83% of all of my metrics were in tolerance, meaning the rest of it was out of tolerance, right? So I only get 83% of that average score, which gives me a 59. Okay, so your goal is to eliminate everything that's failing. So if I look at this one, I've got a lot of opportunity right here. If I improve my spot color scores and I reduce the number of out of compliance measurements, this score will go up significantly because my rate of compliance will improve.
Excellent.
All right, next, please. So again, using that the storyline I was telling you earlier, that if I continue to look at all of the areas that I'm doing poorly at, or even better, if anything is failing, if I get rid of those failures and I improve those scores like we just talked about, what we're going to see is over time, our score is going to continue to climb. What I'm showing you right here is this is real data from a brand that started working using ColorCert a long time ago. And what they did was, as their suppliers started to measure their work, what they found, and this is common, by the way, we see it with so many other brands. I see it with all my suppliers when they do their own plotting of this. Starting out, when we start to measure stuff, what we see is scores that are not only not great, okay, but they're all over the place. We got some good work and some poor work. It's very erratic, okay. So once you start to measure stuff and you start to pay attention to where things are failing and you eliminate those areas of failure and you improve on those things, then your scores become more consistent and better. So this line up here represents the scores that we measured over time, and you can see they improved. And across the bottom for this particular brand owner, this is the ramp up of their suppliers and the amount of work that they were measuring, okay? So they were measuring more and more work across all their suppliers. And as all their, more and more work was getting produced, more and more of the problems were being resolved, and the scores continued to move up. And again, I see that on my side where I work mostly with suppliers. They see this too. They didn't even know that they were printing out of compliance to their own requirements until they were actually capturing the data and viewing it in this way. So they could see their goal is to try to get better scores. They would do as I described earlier. They would go and look at the jobs that are failing, find those opportunities for improvement, and do the deep dive to find the root causes and fix those things, buoying up all the scores.
So a couple of things, Mark. So regardless if they're actually working with a brand or not, implementing this will actually help them just generally improve, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And then you can also within the software actually sort of determine to actually say you can enter your own, let's say your own house specifications, even down to a visual, right, as well. So it's not just a numerical. You can put, I want to visually approve this as well, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So there are options in there to have people, record, the visual aspects of, is it in register? Do we have dirt? Do we have various other defects? Even to the point of recording, if we did the barcode testing, we can record the actual results of that barcode test in here. So it keeps it all in one place, especially for the brand to be able to see that those things have been done, but also for the suppliers. I've got a number of suppliers, like I mentioned earlier, that their goal is just to be able to know that every press at every plant is capable of hitting good color so they can move that work around. And in fact, some have looked at some cases where they find, this one press at this one plant, it's just not up to the numbers. We're not hitting color regularly on it. Maybe we just don't do critical work on it. Maybe we move other kind of work to it that's not for these customers, or maybe we need to get a new press.
Excellent. Thanks, Mark.
Mm-hmm.
So if they were to also then, just showing you here as a case of if they actually then were to actually go over to, they're using, let's say, the press software, but they can actually then Equinox, as I said before, is it enables you to actually do multicolor. It enables you to actually then start to choose different inks or choose the substrates, but it fundamentally puts a standard process in place. So again, such as what Mark has just been talking about, it enables you to actually put a good process in place to enable you to actually do that. And within the software that we also share with or ship with Equinox, you can again measure to that specification. You can show here in the actual Color Pilot software that you can achieve the specification. Not only can you achieve the specification outside of CMYK, but it shows you from a gamut perspective as well as to what about if I have got this brand color? What about in the screen I'm showing you here? I've got 3 different flavors or 3 different maybe spot colors of Yola drink. What about can I actually achieve these colors? And you can take the CXF data and actually kind of throw it at the actual database and actually take a look and see if it can achieve it, yes or no. If it can achieve it, then it enables you to say, hey, I tell you what I can actually do. I can actually now gang up these jobs together. So back to one of the other points is a case of that I no longer have to potentially just have one flavor on the sheet and actually have X amount of waste. I can potentially have this particular flavor is actually going, is selling extremely well in the stores. So the quantity of that flavor is high, but maybe some of the others aren't so. So I may actually have on a sheet or on the web or something more quantity of the pomegranate, but maybe for pineapple, not so much, but I can still put the 2 together because it enables me to actually do that. And it tells me I can actually do that comfortably using this fixed palette. Now that may actually be, it could be CMYK. In this instance, it's actually saying that it could actually just be OGV. It could actually be a case of instead of V, I'm using a B for a blue. You can interchange these colors as you wish to actually suit the specification and suit the actual, maybe the amount of jobs that you're actually doing with that color set. So you may say that analyzing your database, you could actually say that we do an awful lot of blue colors. So suddenly that dictates the actual what colors you actually want to do on there. And just because we're actually saying that you can go up to 7 colors, it doesn't mean to say that you actually always have to print 7 colors. Again, the software will actually, you can put some, if you like, production logic into the actual software to actually say, if I've got a tint below a certain percentage, just drop it. If I've got it towards, let's say, a 97 and 98%, just make it 100%. You don't want to actually make a problem for the printer. You want to make a friend of this printer be actually then starting to say, I am considerate of you. I am going to try to actually make your life somewhat easier. So you don't want to actually have a moire problem. You don't want to have a tint problem. You don't want to actually have any sort of problem whatsoever. So the software will enable you to do that. And also from a planning and a production perspective, you'll make a friend there as well, because it enables you to start to actually say, okay, I have got these sort of jobs coming through. I can plan these jobs together accordingly. And there may be another session that we can actually do on our Phoenix software that helps you maybe make that a bit more, even further efficient. But you can start to see that actually with this software, it starts to do that. And here is just some examples that you can actually start to, that we've actually got, that changing it from what we class as conventional over to Equinox. These are just some of the actual savings that you actually go and do. Each site is going to be very different. And what we found is that maybe they actually start to say, right, we're going to actually put Equinox on that one press or maybe even one shift. But over time, this grows. And that's what the history shows us as a case of, because they start to make good savings. They start to actually bring confidence that you're not, as I said earlier, you're not creating a problem for that press operator. They're not having to do a CMYK and a Pantone job, then having to wash it, put a CMYK and a different Pantone and wash it, etc., etc. They can actually then start to say, no, this is the amount of colors that we're actually putting on the press. So therefore, their production goes through. They're actually doing, they set up once, it stays on that particular press for a given time, depending, like I said, depending on where they're actually at. And then they actually start to actually sort of plow through the work. So these are the sort of things of the savings that they've actually found themselves doing. So it will be a saving on make ready, saving on ink, saving on all these sort of variables. So it's a big, big factor. And now as well, that some of the things that have driven towards Equinox are those things that I just referred to earlier, such as the CDI and the XBS. They are the foundation for an Equinox, because the fact that you are getting consistent results. Previously, maybe when this has actually been questioned before, it's just because of the instability and the fluctuations of the process previously. A lot more standardization has actually come in, whether it be, as I said, not just the actual plates, the making of the plates, but also analoxes, also inks. Those sort of things have become a damn sight more standard, and it enables these things to be a lot more rock solid. So in that respect, it works really, really well. So this goes back to one of those earlier claims, and I sound like a stuck record now, but basically get back to one of those earlier claims of actually then starting to, if the actual brand is actually saying that previously they may have actually just pushed this and said, we want you to work like this, and the converters maybe who are on the call have to kind of suck it up and just get on with it. With software and applications like this enables you to actually start to be a bit more economical. It starts to actually enable you to actually start to keep your margins correct. It enables you to get that more productivity out the door. But in working with these, with the brands now, the brands are starting to become, because they have their targets, they are starting to become a case of, okay, how much of your work can be recycled? How much of your work is reducing the waste, etc., etc. So there is a lot more of a give and take in the industry that we're starting to see than previously that was there. But overall, one of the things that we're actually looking to do as well is back down to that simplicity perspective as well as between ourselves and others. We're trying to actually make this a lot more of a connected solution. So as Mark has already sort of said, is the case of that where we actually have ColorCert, we're actually sort of connecting the AVT inline device to ColorCert. That goes all the way then back to the pre-press software. So from the pre-press software, we can actually then start to, even at the brand side of things, so Web Center is actually putting all the actual specifications together, and you can actually have the dialogue with customers to actually say, is this correct? Is this correct? As said before, we've actually put the Web Center connected to the cloud, and this is actually then pulling in that digital data. So now the actual brand is actually starting to see these colors on screen, and they're starting to actually see the fact that actually this is going to be, if I choose this particular Pantone coated and I want to switch it to this particular, maybe a cardboard or recycled material, this is the difference it's going to be. But in doing so, they can actually now say, once that job is actually approved and they press the button, that job in its fully formed, all that metadata that Mark was referring to, and all that color data and the specifications of the Delta E is shipped seamlessly to the actual converter. So the converter then, who's got his time now, his time pressure, I've got to get this done within a certain amount of time, doesn't have to go looking for the actual colors anymore, doesn't have to go be worried about the specifications. He doesn't have to go and build the job. It's already fully formed, ready for him to actually go and do. So all of those are savings and actually sort of confidence that it actually brings. And this data, once he's actually gone and measured it, will send it all back to the brand. So, but in doing so, it's actually coming back to the brand in a form that is the case of that it's recognizable. It's not in a language that they don't understand again. It's just maybe that score has come back, as Mark was saying. Maybe I've got a score of 79. I've got a score there and I've got a PDF illustrating I've matched your specifications. So this gives the brand the actual fact that they can actually then start to they can build the artwork to a specification. That software can actually then communicate with their pre-media company via plugins, and the actual pre-media company gets a task. I've got to maybe please look at this particular color. There's some annotations in there. They start to do their work, maybe within Adobe or whatever. That comes back. So the speed to market has suddenly drastically reduced. In doing so, the color specifications are pushed accordingly to the actual the converter, wherever they may be. As Mark has just gone through and kind of explained to you a case of that, they are seeing at their level that how consistent am I? What are the tolerances I have to work with? And so the production manager, whereas maybe they're actually having to have call upon call upon call to potentially justify the work that they've gone and done, or drive to a meeting with the actual brand owner. They don't have to do that anymore. The actual brand doesn't have to fly to that site anymore to actually approve that pass or get an approval of a sheet. All that data is visible for them, and we'll continue to actually sort of improve on this, so that actual data comes back to the brand in a dashboard form, in a very simple way that they can actually see that this is within specification or not. So it could actually be that we're not hitting this specification for various reasons. And again, you can actually sort of react on that accordingly. So we have a complete closed loop and a connected solution that actually sort of shares that information. So there's a lot of benefits there for all people in the actual process. So overall, what we've tried to actually sort of show you today is a case of we've tried to look at it from, as I said, different personas, different perspectives, to say that there are different challenges out there. And whether it be a case of, again, from that on-shelf consistency, whether it be a case of the time to market, whether it be a case of that I've just got to actually make sure that you're printing within my specification, but also at different levels, it's a case of this has got to be easier to use. And I don't want to actually, therefore, I don't want to make it complicated. I don't want to actually sort of it's got to actually sort of integrate with my solution potentially I've already got. How can I actually do that? And we've all got measurements at the moment. We're all being graded in some shape or form as to, are we meeting our specifications? So we believe, again, from what we've tried to do from this session is just to give you some form of awareness of how we can actually sort of help you, depending where you may be, brand, trade shop converters, etc. These are the things that we can actually try to do. But from source, as Mark was saying right at the beginning of the other sessions, to if we actually communicate this accordingly and we control it in a certain way, we can get the correct, from beginning to the end, the correct color. If you've actually put any questions in the actual chat thing here, we'll come back to you afterwards. Please keep on the questions coming, and we'll do our best to come back to you. All the webinars have been recorded. You'll get links for everything from our colleagues, whether it be at X-Rite or Panto Marketing or Esko. We'll contact you, send you the links so you can watch over these again. Mark, any last words that you'd like to say?
No, but I do thank everybody for their time.
Thank you, Mark, for everything, and thanks everybody for their time and their patience. If you do want to see some extra information, if there's any products or any of the hardware that you actually want to dig into, the green certification that I've mentioned, please go onto our websites. The information is there. And for anybody that is in Brussels next week, I'll see you next week. Thanks, Mark.
Thank you all. Take care.
Bye-bye.